Hello, today we will talk about hidden gems in Angular. Uh, I will try to cover most of my favorite things, and it's not only about the new stuff. Some of the things are there for quite some time, since 17, some maybe even older. But it's focused on things that are not so widely used, and I totally recommend start using them because it just makes Angular way nicer framework if you know about it. So here we go. I'm Vojtech. It's a strange pronunciation for you, I guess. It's because I'm from Slovakia originally. I live in Prague, in Czech Republic. We organize a NG Beer meetup in Brno. We haven't had one for quite some time, but I assume we will this year. So if you follow me, you will for sure know when it's happening. It's a meetup about Angular and beer, and we do take both very seriously in Czech Republic. So you are all invited. Also, like, we do not drink beer from the bottles or something. We like have a proper 50-liter keg. You know, if it's 20 people, it's 20. If it's 40, we have 100 liters. No problem. Yeah, it's a very good and long meetup. GD for Angular since few years now. I very much like TypeScript. Not so much JavaScript, but yeah, I'm a huge TypeScript fan. And yeah, I'll be talking about the gems. So let's start. It's all the small things that make the difference, and when you really use and focus on these small things, you can suddenly feel the difference is coming up into a real big thing. One of the first things I'm gonna mention is if you use ng container and, for example, develop your own design system, have your own custom components, there is a way how you can actually now do the default for anything that you are passing down with the ng content. Like you can do the select, and then whatever you put here, not just the default title or text, you can put components there, whatever, it will still work as a default. It's pretty neat solution for providing good scalable design system components. If you don't hear me right, I will start to speak out loudly. Is it okay? The level? It's good? Okay, because I'm never sure. Okay, another one. If you ever wondered if it's possible in a template to cast a type because you want a type safe template for obvious reasons, and you are not sure how to do it, you can actually do it with this kind of pipe. You can just create a pipe that's all boilerplate, and only important thing is this t or undefined, where you return something as t, and suddenly if you pass correct parameters to the pipe to this pipe. Sorry, I thought I have example on the next one. I don't. If you pass correct parameters to this pipe, it will actually become type safe. The only thing you actually need to do is to write the types that you like, enums or something that you actually want to use in your component template, like properties, not template, component TypeScript, like properties. Once you do it, you just pass it correctly, it will cast. So you will do cast, double dot, or column, or whatever it is called in English, and your desired type. It's quite useful when you have things like switch case that is not fully type safe, so you can focus on doing it properly. Yeah, this is how you would in the component define like, these are the three types I really want to use. This will be the ones I want to cast into product, advertisement, category preview, and this will be the use case. You have a switch case, and based on the type name, for some of you that might be using GraphQL, you already know that this is a GraphQL way of doing things, because you will every time receive a type name, and if you see that type name is product, you are absolutely sure that that fragment is product. That's why you can absolutely cast that item to product and then have a fully type safe my product input. it will not yell anymore. You don't have to use the $any. Also, you don't have to do the photos. I will hand you over the presentation with copy-pastable examples. Don't worry. But if you want to send it to Slack right away, you can, no problem. Yeah, there will be a huge part about routing. There will be a bunch of stuff that I really like about how routing currently works and what features it has. So let's just wrap it up in this whole routing category. You don't see the whole thing on that part, but I assume that most of you have already seen the routing configuration. So you are quite used to what it's written there. This is the old way of doing things with ngModule there. You have the for root import. For some reason I included use hashes through, but that's not needed at all. But yeah, you have the app module with the routing configuration. You have your routes array for the home and platform. Then you see the load component that loads children, because home is just a component and platform actually has some more routing in it. And then you actually see what is behind the whole products module with the what are the children of the platform. This is the old way of doing things. What you could refactor to is obviously standalone and have a way nicer routing, but on top of using standalone, you can start using export default in your components. Yeah? So if you write a component, you just add this one very clever keyword, and then suddenly you can do this instead of having then M module or C component something. It will just work. It's quite good. And there is an added benefit to this, that once you export default something from the component like this, it becomes quite ugly if you want to export more things. So it forces you to have one file per component. Don't include types with your components or whatever else. Put a pipe there. That's usually a pretty bad code smell, so it encourages you to not do that. You just start exporting defaults from your components, and routing will be picking it up pretty nicely in a one-liner. So the whole configuration basically becomes this. Suddenly you don't have the whole complicated stuff. You have a very nice, very neat, small route configurations. Okay, have you ever heard about hybrid rendering? Okay, there are a few people, and one of the hands actually had a talk on on rendering, and no one else had a hand up. So I'm asking it again. Who knows what hybrid rendering is? Okay, still the same.
Like a combination of server and client side.
Yes, good guess, I guess. Yeah, it's all about client side and server side stuff. I will be more specific about it. I don't think I have a slide explaining this. Usually people know, and don't get me wrong. It's just a thing that these features get hyped so much with all the releases that I just assume people know. So let me explain. You basically have three approaches currently, like the widespread three approaches to how rendering could work. First one, obviously, is on client. So you render everything on client, JavaScript runs, does all the DOM operation. That's what you normally see with Angular or any other framework, that clients render the good old single-page applications. Yeah. Then there is server-side rendering, which, again, obviously does the same thing, but on server ships the rendered HTML as a string or streams it to the client that renders. Then there can be bunch of various approaches for takeover, for how does the client react to actually displaying like working site, single page application. And here you can have hydration, or you can have like a complete takeover with the flicker and all the ugly stuff. And then there is also part that you could call pre-rendering, and static site generation, SSG. So basically we are talking about CS. Sorry, I'm not very good with abbreviations. So client-side rendering, server-side rendering, and pre-rendering or server static site generation. Yeah. With these three approaches, you can achieve most of the good use cases in the industry, in whatever is needed. So every time I will be talking about something is client server or pre-render, I basically mean this. And every time I say pre-render, that something is being like generated beforehand, it basically means that build is doing it. The Angular builder, the CLI that you have configured in your project is doing the page rendering and putting the whole website into the page, like you can imagine a index HTML for each of the routes, and that will be outputted to dist folder. So you have the whole routing in the dist folder. Okay, so simple bootstrap. This is, in every new project or with every standalone configuration project, you should already see something like this. You have a bootstrap application with app components, and then you have a bunch of providers. The important providers here are the provide server-side rendering and provide routing and server routes. This is something that will be becoming default, the generating of the server routes in Angular 20. So each new application in Angular 20 will by default assume that you actually want to have the server routes. And this is how server routes can look like. You define basically same routes that you can share them that would be there on a client, but they can be they can have one more thing, and that's the render mode. So for the first one, where you have a default path of nothing, it's just the landing page, you are like, let's render this on the client. Why? Because I don't know, there is a reason, it changes for everyone. There is a very dynamic one-time offer that has a timer, something, a marketing team had a really complicated design there, so we decided that this is client only. Then you have an About Us page, which is a completely static page. It never changes, it just has the address, all the legal stuff, and nothing that would require it to update often. So we just decide that About Us is completely fine being pre-rendered, and every time you build your application and deploy it, it will actually get rendered, put into dist, and deployed onto hosting wherever you host your whole application. It will only change if your pre-rendering runs again. You can trigger your pre-renderings in theory anywhere and anytime. So there is a quite good use case where if you are writing a blog page, you have your own personal blog. So you would do something like having articles there, and with all these articles you could basically trigger re-rendering them only when the content changes, and you can have a hook that would trigger this in GitHub Actions, so it would only run build for specific pages at that moment. Okay, next one is dashboard. You decide that render mode for the dashboard is server. Why? Because because this dashboard has a chart, and on this chart there is something that is really complicated to aggregate data from. It takes a lot of resources, so it makes quite a lot of sense to just do it on server because it's cached there, and all the nice reasons, and you just ship it to the front end pre-rendered. Quite a common stuff with big dashboards or huge data sets. Then you have a video that has a ID setting that you can have multiple video details, and the only thing that the video page is doing is showing a video player. Does it make sense to pre-render or server-side render that? No, because what would server see? Just a video tag. It would not play the video, it would not do anything with it, just client-side render it. and then everything else, whatever, just decide what your application needs. It's not about the actual use cases, it's about all the possibilities that you currently have, because beforehand you would need to do quite a lot of setup to actually achieve this. And not only that you can include something like render mode, you can also include this very interesting get pre-render params function that will automatically, based on what you return, pre-render all the dynamic IDs that you might have in your application. So let's get back to the example with the block articles. You have all the blocks stored somewhere in, I don't know, CMS, Contentful, whatever, some headless CMS, and you don't know what all of your slugs for the articles are, or what all of the products that could eventually be on the eShop are. So you actually do, inject the same service that Angular is using in the products list page, get all the product IDs, map it to the correct format, return it with this function, and at this moment, the pre-rendering build step with your Angular CLI will actually know that these 1,000 pages needs to be put into your dist, as they all need to be pre-rendered. It's quite a neat solution for not needing to actually write everything manually, or having a separate script that you would generate all of these numbers. You can do one pretty little API call that in theory you can safely call the same stuff that you use already in your Angular service, especially if you already have all the logic for GraphQL or any REST authentication that you need to have in your app. Okay, next one. Page status code. It was quite difficult previously, like in older versions of Angular, to do this, to return a 404 for not found page, and like you would have to have a very elaborate setup where you would need to be passing the request and response and like the whole Express server to actually do this. Currently, you just generate the project with the server routes, and you can already do it. You could even decide that your page not found is never any different, so you would just do pre-render, and it would work. The hosting should be able to work with it. Okay, we are still at router, but we are a little bit going off the pre-rendering stuff. It was a huge part of what I really wanted to show, but input data are also quite important. So every application has a bunch of inputs. Let me ask you first, how many of you already use signal inputs? Most of you, but there are still people that use old inputs, or just shy people. Good. So I will show you something for both, just because these some of these features will have a parity in old and new way. So I intentionally show both, but I wanted to know if for future presentation I should still include the old input. So here we go. We have a checkbox. Yeah, this checkbox has an input if it's disabled or not. You have a false as default for the input, and you can use the transform for transforming the value from string to an actual boolean. And with this that you can then write disabled nothing, or just disabled, because just disabled without the empty string is basically equivalent, and it would and it would work from that moment. It would actually be correctly initialized, like in previous Angular or without the transform. it would just yell at you that the transform needs a boolean, and now you can do this. And it's not just that you can use transform for these kinds of things. You can actually use transform for much more complicated need solutions. So imagine that you have a chart that can be in 3 or more sizes, and you actually want, like, your public API for using this chart is small, medium, or extra large, but you actually switch case to pixels and have this input size string. Sorry, there should be number. My bad. So this would actually correctly translate the sizes to the pixels. And if you are not, like, I could do that anywhere else in the pipeline. Like, I could probably do this in my own changes or ng on init or somewhere. Well, obviously you could, but first of all, it wouldn't be reactive. This will automatically bind when the value is changing, so it quite nicely goes into how Angular is supposed to work. And also you can do something like this. You can host bind it to the CSS variable, and now you can use these pixels in your CSS directly, and you would be absolutely sure that every time someone changes the value or when the component is used, these pixels would get correctly bind to your CSS property. And if you use the new version of Angular with inputs as signals, then you can do this. You can have the same thing as a signal and bind it in your host, where up here you can use signals. Okay, who has been using query parameters in your applications? You have query parameters. So you obviously have the normal route parameters with the column, with the double dot, and you also have query parameters. You use both. Good. I also use both in many places, and it has been a really weird situation where every time I wanted to use a parameter, I would either have to do a activated route, snapshot data, or query parameter. Then I would have an untyped map, and I would have to convince Angular compiler to not yell at me that I absolutely know that my ID or slug or whatever is there. So it has not been a nice experience. Well, now it is. You can do with component inputs binding, and then and then you can do both of these. The first one works with input, with string input, signal input, where the ID would actually auto bind to this. And the second one is an equivalent with the old input, where it would bind also to whatever the name of the property is. So this would auto bind to parameters of your route configuration, which is quite nice already. Not only it can bind to route configuration, it can also bind to query params. Just make sure you don't conflict the names, because if you have ID in the query params, I'm not sure which one it will pick up, but you will soon find out.
But I wonder why it's not a default setting, so it's much better than...
Yes, because it would break many applications.
And also it's not clear this is query parameter. You don't know.
Yeah. But once you actually start using it and make that culture in your team.
Why it will break applications? You still have access via activated route, right?
Yes, but then if you would have a ID binding in your application, or product ID with square things in the template, then which one would you expect would bind? The query parameter or the actual binding from the template?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. So now, I don't know. I don't know, and that's a pretty pretty good question, and I would say it's quite neat if you start with it. Like if you start with knowledge that your project is now doing this, then it's amazing. And I can tell you that every project that I started as new already does this. Like if I initialize a new project, it absolutely has with input binding parameters, and I can tell you that even Angular CLI puts it there by default. So you have it there if you generate new project. So
what version is it from?
this is 17, I think, but it only started appearing at 19.
Yeah, but actually, because this only will be relevant for components used in routing, right?
Yes.
So you don't use such components in template. Of course
Exactly.
you can, but the assumption is that you will rather use it in routing.
Yeah.
So you won't pass parameters via
True.
template.
That true. But there are also applications that, for some sick reason, do use router, and then they also put the same views into modals, and that would break. Yeah, but very good question. Keep it up.
Do you do that only for one component, or is it for the entire?
No, it's a global setting. It basically binds like the router, and this is like completely different talk. But router is quite interesting in how it does things. And if we take a brief moment to pause, whatever is on screen, and I'll just explain one real-life example of how I figured out that router is doing things much more clever than if we do it manually. Is I was working for one huge Angular project, and we had a problem with lazy loading components, because at some point we basically realized that if we use NGRX with effects, then every time we put a lazy loaded component somewhere, it basically fires all the effects again and again and again. So every time it appeared, it just did all the, like, at some point you would notice that there are like 17 requests for everything. And you would be like, what is happening? Router doesn't do this. So then we realized that, if I ask you a question, do Angular modules ever die? Do they ever just die, disappear? Everyone is, no. Yes, they do. Modules are supposed to die and disappear. And it's the router that keeps them in cache, so they don't. So as soon as you start doing your own thing with putting components into, like if you do a factory on module and actually create it, and you expect the module not to die when that component that created the module dies, you're completely wrong. Module will absolutely die. It will disappear. So as soon as you create the component again, the effect will register again. But the effects in NGRX work in a way where the effects don't die because they are globally registered. So it will just register again. At some point, it's a horrible mess, and like a month of investigation. Yeah, so be careful when doing crazy things without router. And now I'm pausing. Later on, we will show some example of lazy loading, which is now quite more user-friendly, and with this you no longer have this problem because everything is still in the Angular bubble, and you don't have to worry about things breaking. So, as I said, you can also bind to the page. Yeah, this is a query parameter page. Quite often used. I have never seen an application that doesn't have paging, or they are probably very small. But as soon as you have a paging in any form, you probably want this. So why is it important that we can do this simply? Because pages never index from 0. That's the first thing, that someone decided that pages should not be 0 and they always go from 1. So default for page is 1, and this will absolutely work. Like if you put it there, whatever falsy value null 0 will come there. It will automatically get switched to string none. And you might say, okay, but now the page is string. Well, that's where the transform comes in. You can do this. And now the page is a number, correct number every time, inferred from the page query parameter.
Is there any aliasing available? So does the variable name have to be the same as the query parameter?
Yeah, very good question. I would assume that the aliasing with the, like, you could do the old inputs rename, that could still work, but I never tried it. I never tried if I rename, like, with the old input, because you cannot rename the new ones. I don't think you can rename them.
Because then it would be a good idea for clarity. You could rename
Yeah.
it to something like page from.
Yeah, that could be. Or you can directly name it.
You can
No, you cannot.
You cannot. Actually, you can use alias property in
Signal inputs.
next to transform.
Okay, I didn't know if it supports the alias property. Then probably yes. I would.
An alias property for signal input. So you can have like alias and different name.
And
Just check it.
okay, so the different name would pick it up. The alias would be page, and the name of the property would be actually page from query.
Probably, yes.
It would be very nice if it worked this way, and I'm sorry I cannot confirm.
I think it's working.
Good.
Because I created a short about it, so. Or maybe-
But you also sound like you don't have it in your project. Yeah. Every time I actually, like, even when I was creating these, each of them and each of the things you can copy paste, I actually tried in the project, because ChatGPT is often giving you a very strange things. Like it was trying to convince me that I could do empty initializer for NG4, like for the new 4, which is definitely not the case. Like, you cannot do that. And GPT was like, yeah, it works. I was like, no, it doesn't. So yeah, I'm sometimes very careful about stating that something is working that way. Okay, you can enforce types with directives. And this is quite useful if you have, for example, web component, if you're in your application, and the web component obviously doesn't support TypeScript. Web components do not have, type definitions for their inputs. So you have something like this. You have a swiper container, you swipe a JS, and the swiper expects config, and the config can only be swiper options. And you know what these options are because you can import swiper TypeScript definition and actually have that whole object definition. But if you would do it without this directive, just use the web element swiper container and put config there, this would be completely senseless. It wouldn't know. But as soon as you create this directive that actually doesn't do anything, you see it doesn't bind, it's just input exists there. At this moment, you have a type-safe config for swiper container. You can apply it to anything else. Like, once you have something third party that has a wrong type definition of you, or you created your own extension on something and it just yells at you for some reason and you don't want to use $any, you can take this approach. I actually created an article about end-to-end tests, and in this article I write that you can have a very simple directive similar to this one, which is basically called end-to-end ID, and then you have a map of all the end-to-end possible variations for the IDs. Like maybe I will show you in the article if it loads. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so you create a map like this. Yeah, you know that you have a landing page that has a login button, you have a toolbar that also has logout button, you have a sidebar that also has a bunch of buttons. Yeah, Then you create copy-pastable solution for the type inheritance. It does a bunch of things, and then you can start using this directive that is e2eid in this way, where this would be a thing that you can use on your in your Cypress or any other end-to-end test, and it would correctly select the element that you actually need. And when using the element in the template, where is it? Do I have? Sorry, I don't see it very good. No, I don't have an HTML screenshot. Ah, no, I do have here. So, no, it's not HTML. Where is my HTML? I don't have it. I'm sorry. I'll have a look on that article later. It disappeared. So in HTML you would basically just use the end-to-end ID with the same dot separated selector for the correct ID. So you achieve a parity with the end-to-end test. So every time your IDs change, you have to you get notified that you need to change some of the end-to-end tests. Okay, and as I stated at the start, many things are hidden, in plain sight. You might not know that they exist and might want to start using it. There is one thing that I included that everybody already knows that exists, and still not enough people use it, or at least I have that impression that people just don't for some reason. Do you know what it is? Is there something from Angular that you would wish you would use more often? No one. Okay. This thing. So, when was the last time you wrote a differ?
When I was doing my talk.
How many differs do you have in your application? Like, I will start counting, and people can, raise hand. 1, 10, 20, 100? No. So yeah, differ is very underused. Honestly, even like when I do workshops, the most asked questions are always about differ. For some reason, people really like it that it exists and don't use it. And I understand that it might be a bit off-putting, that you have to think about the strategies, how to actually hide something or not load it before it's actually needed. But I would encourage you to look at your application, maybe open up the network, see how many things are loaded there, or even open up the bundle analysis and figure out if they're find the biggest thing and think, is this actually needed in my app? Because one of the best examples, once you have a user and admin in your application, like different roles, then you probably should start using differ, because at some point, okay, it's not that example, but the next one, at some point you come into a position where your users are paying the price for all the admin stuff to be loaded. So quite an important thing to think about when designing the features, like what parts of the feature should be hidden because they are not in the current user role, not definitely needed until you hover over some button or visible at the screen. Yeah, and let me switch to this template lazy component before differ. So this is how it used to look before differ. Like, this is why people weren't writing a lazy loaded components like outside of router. I mean, like template lazy loaded components, conditional imports, because you would have to write something like this, and this assumes that you actually use ngxd library. So this is with library in use. You have to create a lazy wrapper, then you do an actual import, and notice this, I have input, my input, output, my output, just two of them. If your actual component would have 100 of inputs, you would have to copy paste all of them, so they would auto bind. It was very complicated, very nasty, and if you remember, rewind back to my rant about how modules are destroyed and kept in memory. This wouldn't cover you that like if you would import another component but a module, you would have to take care of the whole, you know, lifetime existence or potential dying of that module. So this can now be done like that with, you know, differ on viewport. On viewport literally means if I scroll to that, and the previous example doesn't even have the logic of, you know, observer scrolling, all the stuff that actually needs to be there. This is included. So once you do this, once you use conditions, once you use all of the stuff that differ has, I very much encourage you to go to the documentation and see what differ can do. Yeah, it can only get better. And, you know, once you notice that something loads slower, or you are like, but maybe if I need it, I don't want users to wait for it, or so I don't want it to flicker. There are ways to go around it. There are pretty easy ways how you can do prefetch there or preload. And there is no reason why not start using that. Also, as I was saying, once you have different roles in your app, you should wrap everything with this condition. Instead of ngIf, you should use differ when and what the role is. Because at that moment, none of the stuff, imagine that admin tools panel has a rich text editor in it with highlight.js and I don't know what else. Now it's not loaded and you don't need to care about it. Okay, last thing, and I'm sorry that my demo is broken, but I have different backups to show you. It's router and view transitions. One of the simplest things you can do today or tomorrow, but I would even say today, is to write this little line in your router configuration, and suddenly all the pages that you go through would get a little animation where they fade in and fade out. So they overlap. It's like very subtle, nice, works by default. If you don't like what it does by default, but it's much better than the flickering that there is normally, you can override it with something else. I will show you what it can do. So this is a little bit more complicated example where it zooms in the picture. So be ready. Yeah, it does this. For some reason, you know, Outer decided that this is a good UX. So, so it can do this. And also, like, this is how the configuration can look like from the documentation. And you see that you can override it with anything you want. You just go to your CSS. This is now standard CSS behavior. And you do view transition old to view transition new. You define that it should be 200 milliseconds, and you say now it should, you know, rotate and fade in together. And what it will do is this. Every time you increment, I'm not sure if you will see it, but here in route, the page number will change, and it will do this. And this was the only thing you needed to configure. Override the default behavior, and, you know, if it was not numbers but some pictures, it would do the same thing for the picture. It's quite an easy thing. Sorry, very good UX for the for using all the transitions between router. Because I remember when I would have to actually manually set up the can deactivate and wait until animation is done and triggers something else, and it was horrible. So this is much better, the CSS native way of doing things. Yeah, I showed you the demo. This is also how it can look. You can see that now it just flickers, and now there will be a very subtle, you don't even see it. Yeah, but it does something, you know, it's 200 milliseconds and this is a projector. So there is an amazing talk. I'm not gonna play it, but this talk needs to be taken seriously. It was last year on NgConf from Mike. Very much recommended. Sorry, it played it. And the very, very last thing I want to mention is that there is a bunch of migrations. Let me test you. What migrations do you know exist?
Input, control flow.
Control flow, input. Like you mean like signal, input,
Yeah,
output? Yeah, good.
Self-flow stacks.
Okay, good one. Yeah. That was too quiet.
Inject.
Inject, yes.
Yeah.
Now there is inject.
This is something else. Standalone.
Standalone, yeah. Actually, like standalone are 3 migrations in one. Pretty important one, I would say. Yeah. So this is the page that you need to check often, I would say, at least with each release, because not everything, obviously, not everything is run when you upgrade Angular, but there is a dedicated page for all the official migrations. So you named most of them, all of them. Clean up unused imports, quite a good one. If you migrate to standalone, Angular 19 will know if your directives, components, pipes are not used in the template, and it will just remove them. That's quite a good one. You will never get that behavior with modules. Inject, output, input, lazy loaded routes. Also, does anyone have a project without lazy loaded routes? Like, do you, every time when you have route, you have the load component and the import? You don't have component and the actual component. No?
Like we can use both, right?
Well, you can use both, but the thing is that you should not use component column, because unless it's app component or something loaded by default, it shouldn't be there, because that literally means that you are just including the components for every chunk, or not every chunk, but you know, but the the main one, the initial chunks. There is an array of initial chunks that is always loaded, so it would just be there.
When you expect to load something immediately when you go
Yeah.
there, you know that the user flow is that user will go to next page, so you can load it eagerly, so you won't have delay.
Even there, like, how much delay do you assume there is? Not that much. If we are really talking about that, from product list user always goes to product detail, or most of the time, then the difference between having the product's detail there, it's quite insignificant. And I would say that product detail is almost every time much bigger than the list. So the user will every time pay the price for having the detail there if they don't visit. I wouldn't, I would switch the behavior. I would say it is fine to have some kind of delay, especially if you have a router transitions, because then the delay is what, 20 milliseconds at most. Like, we are talking good network.
Yeah, that's
Good. So this is something again I recommend checking out with every update, with every announcement. Things will be maintained there. Most of the migrations just work. Some of them actually have problems. Like, obviously they might break parts of the application. But thing is that you can run the migration for a specific path, which is also a thing that most people do not know. Like, I think all of them support it now. So you can just migrate parts of your application that it doesn't break, then do the rest manually. For me, for example, I found out that the control flow breaks the app or the component template if I have multiple if else, and because of the context I just use else again as a variable, and it just assumes that there would be different names for the else, which was not a requirement back then. So yeah, it breaks. But then what it means for me is that I migrate everything else, go to that one component, rename the else's, and that it works. Yeah.
Or if you, sorry for interrupting, but if you have else and you use template in old style if, and then you use the same template in outlet.
Yeah.
So it will
disappear for.
It will disappear, or I'm not sure. Maybe the code was duplicated, so it was like it should use template still, but it
duplicated is the fix. I would assume now that somebody fixed it, because previously it would disappear. Yeah, I know, and the thing is that I wouldn't know because there on that specific project there wasn't strict typing in templates, so I wouldn't even know the connection. Like it would just break in runtime, and that was not good. But again, it's much easier than doing it manually. I would even say that it would be completely useless to have new control flow, standalone, all of the stuff if there was no migrations, because nobody would do that by hand. And since we already had a topic of AI in a previous talk, it is also quite interesting that someone said it, not sure if you or someone else, that it is hard to force AI to use the new Angular syntax, which I completely agree with. Obvious answer is why, because it is not on Stack Overflow anymore. So how else would it know? It just doesn't. It only can learn from documentation or open source projects or your own very harsh feedback. And one of the ways how you can achieve, for example, with Cursor or JetBrains AI, that it actually knows what to do, is that you have your ESLint rules configured properly, and then tell it with this context setting that every time before you hand over answer, run the ESLint for the file, and just use the Angular ESLint, prefer new control flow, prefer self-closing tags, prefer, like each of these rules I think has its own rule that you can disallow anything else. It's very good. It's very good thing to do. You will not regret it. And yeah, I would say that's all on this topic. If you have any questions, or it could be connected, it could be not, ping me, or I'm not sure how long we stay here, but I assume there is pizza coming, so we can chat. Thank you.